Hi, this is Marc Zicree, and welcome to the Funny Science Fiction PopCast,
the show that helped Commander Riker get a leg up on the chair-sitting competition.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. And just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 86. He'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and joins Team Animorphs in the battle versus an army of parasitic aliens who are slowly infiltrating Earth, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has his back and what's left of his fur coat.
And now, a word from our show sponsor, Level Up Sabers. Their link can be found in the show notes.
All right, so our guest today is a writer, producer, and director with credits on shows like Babylon 5, Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, there's Sliders, Space Command, and so many more. We are very excited and very proud to welcome Marc Zicree to the Funny Science Fiction Podcast. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Hi, guys. Glad to be here.
Right off the bat, the first thing that I want to talk to you about is Star Trek. Now, at 45 years of age, which is where I am pretty new to the fandom. I have been a Star Wars fan my entire life and kind of always poo-pooed the Trek and put it on the back burner. May have made fun of it from time to time. I'm not positive. But I am thoroughly loving and enjoying the new series, Strange New Worlds.
Yes.
And that has led me to watch the original series. And I've just recently started that, and I'm probably about 4 or 5 episodes into that. So for you, as a younger man, what was it about Star Trek that drew you in but keeps you coming back to Trek all these years later?
Yeah, well, I think that if you're a science fiction kind of person, the most powerful impressions are often when you're youngest. And so anyone who was like a kid or a teenager when Star Wars came out, that's going to be it for them. And I was 10 when the original Star Trek debuted. So that was like, I often say other people had heroin, I've got Star Trek. And, it was because, there were so many sort of very less wonderful science fiction shows that had come before, like Lost in Space, things like that, where you got a sense that there was a potential there, but it was not fully realized. And of course, I was a fan of Twilight Zone as a kid. But when Star Trek came on, it was just so astonishing and wonderful. And, every week, that first season particularly, it was just, doing stories that no one had ever even contemplated before in television.
Mm-hmm.
And the cast was terrific. Everyone on it was very, very, very solid. And of course, Kirk, Spock, McCoy had a great chemistry. And so I, at 10, recorded every episode on reel-to-reel audio tape, just in case the show never aired again. And because they didn't have VCRs when I was a kid.
Right.
And I was very lucky when I was a child, when the show was running, to meet Nichelle Nichols and go on the Star Trek set. And when I was 13, I think, I read The Making of Star Trek, and that made me want to be a writer producer in television. So that set me on the path I've been on pretty much ever since. So that was my first experience of Star Trek early on.
Excellent.
That's
okay.
So cool. So you mentioned that whatever was the sci-fi when you were a kid is what sets the tone for your sci-fi. Yes. I grew up watching Deep Space Nine. Like that was our family's weekly television routine, is that we watched the new episodes of Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
And I learned that one of the best episodes of the series, Far Beyond the Stars, when Sisko finds himself living in a world, or living the life of a science fiction writer in the 1950s, is actually based off of a story that you wrote.
Yeah. It's interesting because I actually outlined the story, and then the only reason I didn't write the script was because I was a producer on Sliders at the time. It took them an entire year to buy Far Beyond the Stars from when I pitched it, and I was writing 2 Sliders episodes back to back that were going into production immediately. And Ira Bear wanted to fast track Far Beyond the Stars because he knew it was going to be a landmark episode of Star Trek. And he wanted to schedule it during what was called sweeps weeks, when the ratings of the show that week determines the advertising rates they can charge. And so I said, look, Ira, I wasn't ever cut off its story on any show I was writing. And I was a producer at Universal at the time. And I said to Ira, I called Ira and I said, look, I want to write the script. And he said, if you quit your job on Sliders, you can write the script. And I actually considered it for about 90 seconds, and because we all knew it was going to be a classic episode,
Right.
but I couldn't leave my guys on Sliders in the lurch. They really would have been, screwed. And so but I just knew that Ira and Hans Beimler, who was a former boss of mine, did the draft, and it followed very much the outline I wrote, and but we all knew even before I wrote it that it was going to be one of the great Star Trek episodes.
So where did the story idea come from for you?
Well, it's fun because, as I mentioned, when I was a kid, Star Trek debuted, and I noticed that the people writing for Star Trek, Theodore Sturgeon, Harlan Ellison, George Clayton Johnson, a lot of the writers who were writing for the original Twilight Zone, the original Outer Limits, and the original Star Trek were the same people, and also they were writing the books I was reading at the time, because I was a science fiction fan from when I was, as far back as I can remember. So I was reading Heinlein and Sturgeon and Ray Bradbury and Harlan Ellison and all these people. And so I realized that, there was a real crossover between novels and TV and film. And so as soon as I was old enough, like 15 years old, 16 years old, I started going to science fiction conventions and seeking out these writers, and they became mentors and friends to me. And so when I was a teenager, I went to the Clarion Writers Workshop, sold my first short story, and then came back, and Theodore Sturgeon, the great Star Trek writer and science fiction writer, was teaching a class, and I took that class, and Ted became a great mentor and friend. And I realized from knowing these writers and knowing their history that they basically were the first generation of modern science fiction writers, and they were writing it for the love of it. And they initially were writing for the pulp magazines for like a penny a word, 5 cents a word, back in the 50s, 40s, and 50s. And there wouldn't be a Star Trek or a Star Wars if not for those writers. And so I very much wanted to show that world. It had never been shown on television in any way, and so I wanted to show why those people were important, why science fiction was important, and I wanted to show that that the way you create a future is first envisioning that future. And Harlan Ellison had done a great recording. He did a little hour cassette recording talking about what it was like to write back then, and he mentioned that when you're writing for that low amount of money, you always were hustling, and that what you did was a certain day each week, the editors would get the cover paintings of the stories for the magazine before they assigned the story that illustrated that cover often. So Harlan would rush over to the editor on that day, trying to beat out the other writers and just extol the virtues, the wonders of this amazing painting, so he could get the assignment. And he mentioned that the worst one, the one that was the hardest, was it was a painting of a cover painting of a woman sunbathing on a New York rooftop, and there was a giant grasshopper peering over the lip of the building at her. And I actually have that issue. I sought it out, and so that kind of gave me the idea of Deep Space Nine as an image on a magazine cover. And then as the story evolved and it became about race, that came from the conversations with Ira and Ron Moore and the rest of the staff. Then it was obvious how it would go, and it was about writing your truth and the cost of writing your truth, but the importance of writing that truth, because writing that truth creates that future. And so we all knew that it was going to be a profoundly important Star Trek episode.
That's awesome. It is legitimately one of my favorites. It is such a cool episode.
Well, thank you. But the fun part was that when I first read the Deep Space Nine pilot script, when it was Ensign Ro rather than Nana Visitor, she wasn't. They were going to have a completely different character in that role. When I saw the pilot episode, I was blown away by Armin Shimmerman as Quark, and Les Landau, who was a director on DS9, was doing a pilot with me. And I said, I want to meet that guy, that Armin Shimmerman. So Les took me onto the DS9 sets, and there was Armin in the whole, he called it Ferengi drag, the whole 9 yards of the makeup. And we just hit it off immediately. And so I've used Armin in a number of projects, including Space Command. He's in the new show that I'm doing. And
excellent.
And he's phenomenal. He's wonderful.
We had the opportunity to talk with Armin a little while back, and absolutely loved having him on the show.
That was like a childhood dream come true, getting to meet Armin Shimmerman.
He's terrific. He's terrific. And,
Yes.
you know, he's a wonderful actor. And I just, I'm so honored to have gotten to know him and work with him.
So a slight deviation from Star Trek. One
Sure.
of the book series that I enjoyed as a kid was Animorphs.
Mm.
So how do you go about writing a series, or what is involved in taking a book series and turning it into a TV show?
It was an interesting challenge. I hadn't heard of Animorphs before. They were looking for a writer to adapt it into a series, and so they flew me to New York, and I met with Scholastic. And at the same time, I had just interviewed to be a writer producer on Sliders. So I actually ended up doing both jobs simultaneously, which was quite a feat. And also, I was writing a novel at the time, so it was that was a busy year. But what I did was they gave me 15 of the novels to read, and I liked them very much. I thought that K.A. Applegate really did a good job. The problem was I wasn't a producer on the show, and I knew that it was going to be a nightmare from a production standpoint, having kids turn into all these different animals, really a challenge. And so I didn't know if they'd be able to pull it off, frankly. But what I tried to do was I laid out a year of the show, and I did all the outlines, and I wrote several scripts to kind of set the template. I think I wrote 3 or 4. And I was trying to basically take what I thought would be the best elements to be able to do, because what you lose, which is a very strong piece of the books, is the point of view from the kids as they're being the animals, as they're experiencing that change of their senses and abilities. And that was something you really wouldn't be able to have effectively in a TV show. So, but frankly, you know, in a way, it was almost like building a car and letting someone drive it off a cliff. But you know, I mean, it's like I had no idea what was going to come out the other end. But literally, because I had contracted to write all the outlines, I would get to my office at Universal at 6 a.m, write an outline for Animorphs, finish it by 10, fax it. This is the days of faxes, to New York, and then switch over to my Sliders job. So it was, you know, so that's how I was working for quite some time. And but I really liked. I mean, I wouldn't have taken the job on Animorphs if I didn't cue into the material, and I did. I liked it very much. It was really. I mean, you could tell that she had a passion for the subject. This is before Harry Potter, and so Scholastic had all these different properties that were popular but didn't take off the way that Harry Potter did. But you got a sense that they were hiring writers who weren't just phoning it in, who were really heart and soul into the material. And so I wanted to honor that in the show, but I was very aware that I was writing in a different medium that had different requirements and different strengths. And so that was how I went about it. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So Marc, let's talk about your most recent project, the one you've referenced a couple different times so far. Let's talk about Space Command. Yes. So for those who aren't familiar with Space Command, can you take a couple minutes to talk to us about the show, sure, how it began, and who all's on the cast that people should be looking out for?
Yes, it's essentially a few years ago, I noticed that science fiction, television in general, but science fiction in particular, was taking a very dark turn. And a lot of shows were very, very, very dark. Battlestar Galactica. I loved that show, but it was like, you know, no one couldn't let someone have a birthday party once in a while, and you know, it was just very dark. And so you know, so I wanted to do a show that would be inspiring, like the original Star Trek inspired me. I mean, people forget that the original Star Trek was made during the Vietnam War and during the riots. Cities were burning, civil rights was going on. People were, you know, it was a very, very intense and divisive time. But Gene Roddenberry still had the courage and the insight to say we can create a better future. We can reach across boundaries and barriers. We can reach out with compassion and action and make a world worth living in for ourselves and our children. This was this was an important real world message, because people went on to become teachers and scientists and raise families and devote themselves to their communities. They were inspired by that message. It was not just disposable entertainment, as most television and movies are. And so I wanted to do something that was inspiring in that same way, without being through rose-colored glasses, or, you know, I didn't want it to be easy to create that future. I wanted to say there are costs to doing that. It isn't, you know, when you go against the powers that be, there are costs. And so a lot of my friends are showrunners, and they wanted to team with me and take it in and get a pilot deal. But I said, you know, well, no, I mean, I don't want it to be cut off at script or cut off at pilot, or possibly have the network or studio ruin it, you know, like put in a stupid robot or a kid or a dog or whatever. I mean, yeah, there are science fiction stories that do those things very effectively, but there's also, we all know, shows that were ruined by network notes. And so I'd never raised money before, but I run a roundtable for writers and directors and actors and producers. I've been mentoring people, thousands of people for decades. My roundtable is free of charge. It's just something I've been doing to create a compassionate Hollywood. And I've been hearing about crowdfunding. And I thought, well, I've never raised money before, but let me see if I can. And so between crowdfunding and selling investment shares for $7,500 each in Space Command, I was able, so far I've raised $3.5 million, and it's still going.
Oh, wow.
So so that gave me the money to open my own studio, and this is the first 2-hour episode of Space Command, and we're about to ship these out. We're finishing the first 2 hours with color correction and all that. We're shooting hour 6 now, and we've written the entire 12-hour season, and we're going to be shooting the entire season this year. That's our goal. And so Space Command stars Doug Jones of Star Trek Discovery, Mira Furlan, whom we lost sadly during the pandemic, but Mira Furlan and Bill Mumy and Bruce Boxleitner of Babylon 5, Bob Picardo of Star Trek Voyager, and Armin Shimmerman and of DS9, and Christina Moses of A Million Little Things, and Ethan Phillips of Star Trek Voyager, and oh God, just a ton of other actors. I mean, a lot of James Hong of Blade Runner and Big Trouble in Little China, and Farhan Tahir, who was in JJ's first Star Trek movie. He's also an Iron Man. On and on. I mean, just everyone I reach out to says yes. Barbara Bain is in it from Space 1999 and Mission Impossible. Just I mean, just everyone I reach out to says yes. And so I have my own studio here. We're based here and in London, here in Los Angeles and in London as well. And it's a dream come true. We're building 2 9-foot tall creatures right now. We have an alien spaceship set that we're completing now. And I just went to a swap meet and bought a jet, a P-33 canopy from an airplane that we'll be using as part of the show. It'll become a spacecraft, and we'll put people in it, and it's going to be, too cool for school. And
that's awesome.
But then beyond that, I'm creating 5 other series with my friends who are the creators of Farscape and The Expanse and Defiance. All these friends of mine who've and a new Rod Serling series. So we're doing a slate of 6 shows that include Space Command called the Showrunners Network. So we're going to be shooting all those pilots over the next few months as well. So it's and Gates McFadden and Veronica Cartwright and tons of other actors are in those shows as well. So it's great fun.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, well, my wife and I write and direct and produce together, and so we write it, we cast it, we shoot it, and I have my own YouTube channel, Mr. Sci-Fi, so we're able to put it out to our audience. And I put out the first hour of Space Command on Mr. Sci-Fi. We've had over 3 million views and 97% thumbs up, so that's better than most TV shows get.
I was one of those views today.
Yay!
So. Yeah, I did. I was enjoying it. So I stumbled across your YouTube channel and I was like, oh, well, look at that. Oh, well, look at that. Oh, yeah. So, and the great thing about your channel, your Mr. Sci-Fi channel, is that you talk about a variety of sci-fi things. It's, there was notes on there about Strange New World. There was some stuff about the new Batman movie. Yes. There was, all kinds of different stuff. So it was kind of nice to see that it was a variety of stuff, not just one particular topic.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm very cognizant of that because, growing up in the world of science fiction and having known and been mentored by so many other great science fiction writers like Ray Bradbury and Ted Sturgeon, it's like, and also I wrote The Twilight Zone Companion, which was the book I wrote right out of college to learn how to make television. And I've been writing TV since I was 22 or 23. So I have a lot of behind the scenes kind of stories and information about all these shows. I mean, the people making these shows, Doug Jones is in Star Trek Discovery, Brandon Braga, who I worked with on the Star Trek Next Generation and the later shows. He's on the Orville. These are people I'm still very much in contact with. And, so I try to be fair in my commentaries, but also not, I was going to say, I don't pull my punches. In other words, if Star Trek Discovery is not what it might be, I go into why I think it's not what it might be. I think Strange New Worlds is much stronger. I think it hasn't had the great brilliant episode yet, but it's had 4 now episodes that were certainly solid, and so if you look at original Star Trek episodes like Corbomite Maneuver, or sort of like the A- ones, Strange New World's been doing those. They haven't had a City on the Edge of Forever yet. They haven't had Far Beyond the Stars yet, but I think they probably will.
Well, for me being the new guy, I would say the first 4 episodes of Strange New Worlds have been very strong.
Yes.
Very well written, very well acted.
Yes.
And I've made this comment on we have every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we have a live show that we do. And one of those nights we talked about Strange New Worlds. And for me, the only difficulty that I'm having wrapping my head around anything that's going on in this show is Ethan Peck as Spock, because he has such a deep voice, and he does Spock very well. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. Yes. And I think he's a phenomenal actor, and I think he does a wonderful job. But, I'm used to, Leonard Nimoy, or, and then there's this guy, and he's not exactly hard on the eyes. No. And here he is with this big deep voice, and I'm like, okay, this is not your grandmother's Spock. So
it's true. Unlike Leonard Nimoy, you never got to see Leonard Nimoy in his underwear, but Spock very hunky Spock, I must say. But it's interesting because when I was a kid and I encountered Spock for the first time. The first time I was aware of Spock was they had this painting that James Bama did of Kirk and Spock and the Enterprise zooming around a planet. This piece of still artwork that they used to promote the show before it aired. They said, "Coming in the fall, Star Trek," and it would be on for like 10 seconds. And I looked at it close. I looked for it, put my face right up against the screen and say, does that other guy have the pointed ears? I mean, what's that story? Is it green skin, pointed ears? And so when Spock came on, he was so different and so distinctive and so interesting. Ethan Peck's Spock hasn't, for me, yet had those moments that make him that kind of breakthrough character. I like him very much. I think he's very solid, but I'm waiting for the great Spock episode that he'll have. It's a little weird when they sort of pull out, well, there's a sister, we never mentioned her in 50 years of Star Trek, but you have a sister and she's on this other show. It's like, okay. But sure. That's like when they said Spock had a brother from one movie, Star Trek 5, and it's like, and then he's gone. It's like they never talk about him again. So.
Well, that didn't work. He's not coming back.
Yeah. But one thing about Strange New Worlds, one thing I'll say about all 3 of the live action shows, the new live action shows, they look gorgeous. I mean, the production design, the level of production, the visual effects, I mean, the costumes, I mean, everything's really great. And the thing about Strange New Worlds is that cast is very strong. There's a lot of really wonderful actors and actresses in that show. So it's the only show I know of where the pilot was shot in 1964 and the show was picked up in 2021. And so that's quite amazing. And because I always loved that first Star Trek pilot with Jeffrey Hunter. I thought it was terrific.
So I think that fans of science fiction these days are borderline spoiled on how much content we're getting. There's the new Star Treks, there's new Star Wars, there's comic books, there's fantasy novels, there's role-playing games, there's Funko Pops. Mm-hmm. I mean,
yes, I hear about that.
There is just a constant supply of new or remade Star Wars, Star Trek, sci-fi content. Mm-hmm. So what is your go-to these days for your sci-fi fix?
That's a really interesting question. First of all, I mean, it's so different from when I was growing up, when you had basically 3 networks and that was it. If they canceled Star Trek, or I was actually outside with a picket sign outside NBC picketing for a 3rd season of Star Trek, so we would get that 3rd season, with my little sign and so forth. And back in the day, in 1968, I guess, or 67. But and now, of course, you not only do you have all these networks, you've got 500 plus scripted comedy and drama series, not including YouTube, not including all these outliers, and so the main challenge is finding the good stuff, quote unquote, and not having enough time to watch everything, obviously. And so, I mean, I'm watching Strange New Worlds. I was watching Raised by Wolves, but that got too peculiar. And I liked Station 11, but again, you're never going to be able to watch all of it. And so you have to sort of pick and choose. I think the interesting thing about Star Trek and Star Wars is now that they're these huge corporate entities, and now they're viewed as money-making machines. And but the good part is that they've sort of moved to the level of Tarzan or Sherlock Holmes or something like that, where you'll have bad versions, and then they'll have good versions. And it's kind of like, so if you don't like the current version of Star Wars, well, wait a few years and there'll be another one that's better or whatever. It's like that's where it's going now. And so we had to suffer through Picard and Star Trek Discovery to get to Strange New Worlds, which kind of went full circle back to the original notion and kind of came out right. And so, but in terms of movies, I go to all the ones that get good reviews and so forth. Then every now and then I'll go to a cheesy one that I like Moonfall, which is a bad movie but a fun bad movie by my lights. And the moon's going to crash into the earth, incredible. And so, but in terms of books, I'm always reading several books simultaneously. So I'm reading science fiction. I'll usually be reading a newer science fiction book, an older science fiction book, a mainstream fiction book, and a history or science book. So in terms of the newer books, I very much like The Martian by Andy Weir, and I've been reading the Murderbot books, and I just whatever someone recommends to me, I'll at least check out, and then I'll read some of the old classics just kind of to see, if I still like them and if they still work by my lights. And, and I'm always reading and studying up on physics and history and all that stuff, just because that feeds the writer machine. And also I'm fascinated by all of it.
I just finished reading Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir.
Yeah.
That one was...
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one. It was a change of pace for me.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was good, but not as good as The Martian. And funny thing is that one of my favorite movies as a kid was a movie called Robinson Crusoe on Mars.
Oh yeah.
And the idea of someone marooned on Mars has been with us many a time. This is called First on Mars, and it's about a guy who gets marooned on Mars. And so that I thought that was a very good book and made into a very good movie. And I've been in touch with Andy Weir since that point. But it's like, there's lots of room for wonderful stories, and it's certainly, in terms of production, it's a golden age of science fiction. I mean, the money they're throwing at it. I mean, with Sandman being 15 million and Star Trek's up over 10 million an episode. What we're doing on Space Command, considering the fact that our first 2 hours have 1,900 visual effect shots, we're doing it for a lot less than they are. But one has to be very ingenious. But I just you try to find the stuff that's of quality, and so you'll be on the lookout for articles that praise something, and you just find it as best you can. But there's certainly a lot of crap out there too.
I think I would love a TV series of the book Sphere by Michael Crichton.
Yes, interestingly enough, when I read that book, I liked it very much, and there wasn't an audio book of it, so I read the entire novel onto audio. So just for my own entertainment. So if you go to Mr. Sci-Fi, there's actually the entire audio book of Sphere read by me.
Oh, there you go.
It's wonderful. It was made into a very weak movie years ago, but it's a very, very fun story. And I'm a huge fan of underwater science fiction. I love The Abyss, the director's cut of The Abyss, not the theatrical release, which really doesn't do it credit. But yes, I agree with you 100%. Absolutely.
So we all have something that is close to our heart at some point. What is a project of yours that is close to your heart that is a little less known?
Well, Space Command, obviously, because it's this big arcing story, and it's all in my head now. And, it's like, I can't wait to shoot it and share it with everyone. In fact, we had a production meeting this morning to discuss our shooting schedule for June and July. And, but also behind me, there are 3 novels, Magic Time, the Magic Time trilogy. I came up with this idea for what if all the machines in the world stopped running and magic came back, and certain people turned into the archetypal mythical creatures that their nature dictates. And so it was a very fun idea. We wrote it as a pilot, Elaine and I, 2-hour pilot, and I wrote roles for Armin Shimmerman in it, and my friend Christina Moses. And it was optioned 8 times. 8 different companies wanted to make it into a series. It didn't get made, so I sold it as a trilogy of novels. Those hit the bestseller list, and then we did a radio play that Skyboat Media has released, and we're going to make it as a TV show. That's sort of on the docket, but it's just a very epic, fun story with wonderful characters, and I'm eager to do it. So that's one of my to-do list items.
All right. So Mark, going through your list of credits on IMDb, I was looking through some things, and there was There's one that actually really kind of caught my attention because it's something I hadn't heard of before.
Yes.
And doing some research, you were involved in Star Trek Phase 2, The New Voyages,
Yes.
which is supposed to be the section that picks up after the original 5-year voyage of the Enterprise crew, stories about characters from the original series.
Yes.
So how did you get involved in that series, and what did working on a project like that mean for you?
Well, this is the fascinating thing. I just wrote a book called Greenlighting Yourself, which just came out. There it is, Greenlighting Yourself. And it basically tells anyone how they can become a writer, producer, director, actor, anything in the industry successfully using all the new tools that are available to us. You don't have to wait for the studio or the networks anymore. And because when I was starting out, they were the only game in town. If you wanted to reach an audience of millions of people, you needed a studio, a network. It cost millions of dollars to make anything. If you wanted to be a successful author, you needed a publisher. None of that is true anymore. And so let's see where to start with this. It's fascinating. And by the way, if someone wants to watch the episode that I co-wrote and directed and executive produced of Star Trek New Voyages / Phase 2, it's on the landing page of Mr. Sci-Fi. It stars George Takei and Grace Lee Whitney and Majel Barrett and Christina Moses, who's brilliant in it. And I was nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula and won the TV Guide Award. So I'm very proud of it. Here's what happened. I was on just when Enterprise was like ending, the fans hadn't really responded to it. It was canceled after 4 seasons instead of the 7 that they had planned. And this is just before JJ mentioned he was going to be doing the movie, right? So I was on a panel at a science fiction convention with various people from the various iterations of Star Trek. Walter Koenig was on the panel, and they asked what was the future of Star Trek as we saw it. And Walter was about to go to upstate New York and film an episode of him playing Chekhov, written by DC Fontana, who had story edited the original series and written great episodes of it. And there were some fans in upstate New York who had gotten the blueprints for the Star Trek sets, the original Star Trek sets, had built them all and were making their own Star Trek episodes, full hour-long Star Trek episodes, which they were putting up online. And they were getting more views than Enterprise was getting on Paramount, the Paramount Network, UPN. And so I said, so after the panel, I sat down with Walter for about an hour and I said, tell me everything. And he told me that information. Now, so that night I went home and I watched one of the episodes, and the acting wasn't quite at the level of a professional production, and they were shooting mini DV, which was not a professional format, lower resolution. But the sets were great, the costumes, the spirit of it was, their hearts were in the right place, and the visual effects were being done by the same guy who was working on Enterprise, who was doing visual effect shots for Enterprise. So I thought, oh, wow. It was like being handed a tool that I knew how to use. And so I thought, well, I can bring this up to where I want it to be. And because I thought this is a great opportunity. So back in the 70s, Paramount was going to bring Star Trek back as a series. It was called Star Trek Phase 2. And they got all of the cast together except for Leonard Nimoy. He was suing the studio over merchandising rights. And so they cast another actor to play a Vulcan called Zahn. But it was going to be the continuation of the Star Trek storyline. And they got Shatner, they got everybody. And they spent a year buying scripts and developing and building sets and doing screen tests. And then Star Wars came out. And when Star Wars came out, Paramount said, well, we're not going to do a TV series, we're going to do a movie. And all of that went into making Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which came out in 1979. They'd been working on Star Trek Phase 2 in 76, 77 or so. So, okay. So at that time, my friend Michael Reeves, who later won an Emmy for Batman the Animated Series, and he wrote for Star Trek: The Next Generation. He was a dear friend. He's the writer who got me into TV in the first place on Smurfs and all those other shows, He-Man, Super Friends. And he had pitched, back in 1977, he had pitched an amazing Sulu story to Star Trek Phase 2, the Paramount version. And it was where Sulu gets marooned on an alien planet and raises a family, and it's all in the wink of an eye on the Enterprise. And I thought, that's a great story. So I called Michael when I learned about what these boys in Ticonderoga were doing up in upstate New York. And I said, hey, Michael, you want to do that episode with me? And he said, sure. So I called the guys in New York, James Cawley, who was playing Kirk and was sort of the power of the throne. And I said, look, I want to do this episode. Michael and I have both written for Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I'd want to shoot it on high def. And and I'd have to insist on I'd want to direct it. And they said, fine, if you can get the equipment, fine. So then I went to George Takei. I typed up, I made some changes in the storyline because they had done a next gen episode called The Inner Light, which had certain similarities. So I moved this story entirely onto the Enterprise, and I made it more about Sulu and his daughter. And so, yeah, so I went to George Takei. I typed up a one-page storyline, and I said, this is the great Sulu episode you never got to have. And I need you to read this right now and tell me if you'll do it. And he read it in his house, and he said, yeah, I'm in. And so then I spent 6 months building a production team. All of the department heads were from Hollywood, from my world. And then my wife and I went to upstate New York, did some acting exercises with their cast, because I knew we were going to be using sort of their main cast, but George Takei was going to be in it, and I cast Christina Moses in it as the daughter, and I got Majel Barrett and Christine, and Grace Lee Whitney to do it, and then it was a year of post-production. There were 700 visual effects shots. But while we were shooting in upstate New York, I said, and Ian McCaig, who designed Darth Maul, designed our characters as well. And I said, but while we were shooting, I said to George Takei, I said, look, a year from now, you and I are going to be standing on a stage at the World Science Fiction Convention in Japan. We'll be screening this, and then we'll be answering questions. I'll be talking in English. You'll be talking in Japanese, because he's fluent in Japanese. And I said, a year after that, we'll be nominated for the Hugo. And that's exactly what happened. And it was the first film or TV show nominated for a Hugo that was not made by the studios or the networks. So
that's awesome.
It was revolutionary. Yeah. And and as I say, if you go to Mr. Sci-Fi, right on the landing page, there's a picture of George Takei. If you click on that, you can watch the entire episode.
Sweet.
Excellent.
Yeah, really cool. I'm very proud of it. But what it showed me, to complete the answer, is it showed me that you could make something of a network quality without a network, and that you could distribute it on the internet and get more viewers than a network show could get or might get. And so that led directly to Space Command, because I thought the only missing piece was raising the money. Because if I could raise the money, and actually someone had given me $100,000 when I was making World Enough in Time, and I put that into production, post-production specifically. But so I realized that you didn't need a studio or a network anymore. And that led directly to what I'm doing now.
Excellent. That's awesome. I'm going to have to go back to your page. I want to check out that episode. I didn't get a chance to see that yet. I didn't realize it was on there. Yeah, I was going to ask you where to be able to watch it, but now that I know, I'll be watching that later tonight.
Yeah, it was. I'm very proud. I'm as proud of that as anything I've done, and it's a very moving story. I think it's very. I love it. Obviously, and Christina Moses, that was her first acting ever in film or TV, and now she's a lead on a series on ABC, A Million Little Things, and so finally, Hollywood recognized her astonishing talent, and I'm very proud of that. She's in Space Command as well. Interestingly enough.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
So we have a Facebook group, and it is just filled with memes. And we got about 203,000 members.
Wow.
And you've written a broad range of sci-fi and a bunch of different stuff. Yes. So what two sci-fi universes would you like to see a crossover between?
Okay, well, first of all, tell your 203,000 fellows to sign up to subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi, because I promise you that everything they're interested in, there's a point where I talk about it. The only thing I'm not knowledgeable about is anime, but every other aspect of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, I'm extremely knowledgeable about. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I even do a history of science fiction. The thing that actually came to mind was my favorite mashup of two franchises ever was not one that I did, but the one that my friend Barbara Hambly did. Barbara Hambly's a very well-known science fiction writer. She's written Star Trek novels and so forth, and I wrote the first Magic Time novel with her. Well, when she was established as a novelist, as a fantasy and science fiction novelist, her editor came to her and said, well, we're going to be taking over the Star Trek novels, and if you have something in a drawer, like if you've ever written a Star Trek novel, even if it was just for yourself, we want to read it. And she said, well, there's one I wrote when I was a teenager, when I was like 16, but you couldn't possibly publish it. And what it was, on the original Star Trek, there was an actor named Mark Leonard. He played a Romulan commander, and then he ended up playing Spock's father. He was wonderful. He had a great gravitas. And Barbara loved the original Star Trek. And then at the same time, there was a far lesser known show called Here Come the Brides, which was set in the 19th century in a lumber town that that was in like the Washington State, and they have a bunch of mail order brides come to the town to have wives, and Mark Leonard starred in that show too. And so teenage Barbara thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have the Enterprise go to that town? So she wrote a mashup between Star Trek and Here Come the Brides. So her editor read the book and said, we'd like to buy this. And she said, well, I don't own the rights to Here Come the Brides. You'll have to acquire the rights. And they said, oh, of course. And so they published the book. They didn't acquire the rights, so they got sued. And Barbara was named in the lawsuit. And fortunately, she had a paper trail that showed that she had warned them. And so she was taken off the lawsuit, thank God. And they had to pay whoever owned the rights, the money. But I thought that was very, very funny. In terms of mashups, gosh, I'd have to think. It's like, I actually do know the mashup I'd like to see. It would be the Orville Strange New Worlds mashup. That's the one. That's the one I want to see. So
that could be very interesting.
Yeah, because Orville season 3 is, I think, going to really step up in terms of production and dramatic weight to really go toe to toe with Strange New Worlds. That's my guess, and because that's what it looks like they're doing. So, but that would be a lot of fun. That'd be a lot of fun.
All right, very good. Well, Mark, we're at a point in the show where we like to take our guests through a little bit of a quiz.
Okay. All
right. This Trek, see what I did there, is brought to you by Star Trek, and it's all about Star Trek. So anyway, okay. All right. So I'm going to stop now before I get too far down a rabbit hole of just using the word Trek wherever I can.
Yes.
All right. So it's a 4-question quiz. All the questions are multiple choice. If you get 3 out of the 4 questions correct, we wanted to send you this book, which is called Custodians of the Cosmos, written by Drayton Allen. Great. Now, it's all about a young man who joined something quite like Starfleet, but not Starfleet, for litigious reasons. Yes. Anyway, he washes out of their academy and rejoins as a custodian to boldly clean up after those who have boldly just went.
Yes, that's funny.
Okay, so we'll send you that book if you get that right. However, if you get less than 3 answers right,
yes,
we take a picture of you, we make a meme out of you, and we put you into our Facebook group. We call it our fun sequence.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I thought you were going to say if I lose that you send me 2 copies of the book. So.
Well, that could be discussed.
Yeah.
All right. So if you agree to those terms, we'll have Nick get us started with the questions.
Yep. You bet.
Which Star Trek captain has an artificial heart? Is it Kirk, Picard, or Janeway?
Gosh, I'm going through the episodes in my head. I'll guess Picard, but I really don't know the answer to that one.
You are correct. It is Picard.
Okay.
That's a good guess.
There you go.
All right.
Well, it's because he was Borgified, so I figured out, maybe that would have something to do with it. But okay. Continuing on.
Solid
Question
logic.
Number 2. What species, known to the Borg as species 329, were deemed unworthy of assimilation? The Kazon, the Tribbles, or the Klingon?
These are interesting questions. Well, I would guess maybe the Kazon. I don't know.
That is actually correct.
Wow.
I am now imagining Borg Tribbles though, and it's hilarious.
I would watch that episode. Absolutely. It's like the rabbit in the Monty Python that flies at your neck and tears out your jugular.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Cool.
Data has a cat.
Keep going.
What is that cat's name? Fluffy, Spot, or Button?
Spot. Yep. I had a cat named Fluffy, interestingly enough, but yeah. No, that one I actually did know. You bet.
All right, that gets you the book.
Yay! Winner!
All right, and just for fun, and to see whether or not you can completely destroy Tim's quiz, what future Starfleet captain survived the Battle of Wolf 359? That Sisko, Janeway, or Archer?
My guess would be Sisko.
You are correct, and you destroyed Tim's quiz.
There you go.
Good. And I actually tried to grab what I thought were harder questions for this.
Those were, except for Data's cat. The rest
I try to throw 3 hard questions and 1 softball in there just in case. Try to give everybody a chance to win, but you kick the crap out of my quiz. Well done.
That was fun. That was really good. The
Star Trek writer or something.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, it's funny because the one the only series I'm really, really, really strong on is the original Star Trek, of course, because I watched that as a kid and rewatched it and all of that. The other ones less so, or at least more sporadically, you know. But it's amazing how much, you know, really great material they came up with. You know, the fascinating thing about coming up with Star Trek stories is you really have to be aware of so many hundreds, if not thousands, of storylines that they've done. So, and then what you're always looking for is what haven't they done? What do I know about, or what viewpoint can I bring to it that has a very meaningful storyline that I can expand that universe with? And that's all. It's a great challenge to find something emotionally very truthful. I'm very proud of the work I was able to do for those guys.
As you should be.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on our show today. Where can our listeners go to find out more about you and your works?
You can go to Mr. Sci-Fi, that's SCI-FI, Mr. Sci-Fi on YouTube, and that will lead you to all the other tributaries to, like, you know, get stuff or find out more, but that's the best place to go. And I have posted hundreds, if not thousands, of videos at this point, and it's been a joy every moment.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely link your YouTube so that our listeners can go find you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And, you know, I hope you continue to check out what we're doing on this end. And I think you'll really like it. And if you're ever in LA, we'll give you a tour of the studio and even maybe put you in a spacesuit and turn a camera on you.
Woohoo. All right.
Cool. I have one quick reason to go to LA.
There you go. Subscribing is the single most important thing that you can do to ensure that we get more amazing guests like Marc Zicree here today to have funny moments and these great conversations to listen to. So please subscribe. It helps us to grow, helps us to get more guests. And we want to make sure that you go over and check out Mr. Sci-Fi on YouTube as well. Check out Mark's work there. There's a lot of cool stuff. I will be on there for hours later tonight. My wife will be thrilled. However, if you are not happy with the content of our show today, please feel free to lodge a complaint with the head of our complaint department. That, of course, is the Borg. We understand that they don't always involve the Queen, but when she does get involved, just know that it is just simply not your day. However, keep that in mind when you do choose to report us to the Borg. Perhaps go a little bit easy on the details and spare us an assimilation. A simple reprimand will do just fine.
I'd be okay with that.
I would go Borg. All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Mark.
Thanks. It's been great fun, and I always love talking about these things because I think we all are who we are because of science fiction, and it's a big tent and it allows a lot of great people inside it, and it makes you better as a human being, I think. And I'm very grateful to
absolutely
science fiction. So, and thanks, guys. I've really enjoyed our talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys, that's going to conclude it here for the Funny Science Fiction Podcast. Goodbye. Bye. On behalf of the rest of the hosts of the FSF PopCast, we want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, please contact us by means of Twitter or Instagram using the handle @FSF PopCast, or go to www.fsfpopcast.com and click on the Contact Me link. Thanks again, and hope you enjoyed the episode.